In a span of 50 years, around 1200 BC, at least 8 major civilizations collapsed simultaneously. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, the kingdom of Ugarit, gone. Not one by one, together. Writing systems disappeared. Cities were abandoned. Some areas took 1,000 years to recover. We've been calling it the Bronze Age collapse for 2 centuries. We still don't know what caused it, and the more scientists dig, the stranger the answer becomes. There is a layer of ash. If you dig anywhere in the eastern Mediterranean, in the ruins of ancient Greece, in the buried cities of Anatolia, in the ports of Canaan, in the archives of Egypt, at a certain depth, at a certain point in time, you find the same thing. A layer of destruction. Burned timbers, collapsed walls, unburied bodies. Tablets that record the final panicked communications of people who knew something terrible was happening and did not understand what. And then, above the ash, silence. In some places, centuries of silence. Between roughly 1200 and 1150 BC, something happened that historians have been arguing about for 2 centuries. Every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean collapsed, not individually, not over generations, together, within the span of a single human lifetime. The Hittite Empire, which had ruled Anatolia for 500 years, fought Egypt to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh and built a capital city of 40,000 people, simply ceased to exist. Its capital, Hattusa, was burned and never reoccupied. The Mycenaean civilization of Greece, which had built the palaces of Mycenae and Tiryns, which had traded across the Mediterranean, which had developed the linear B writing system. It collapsed so completely that Greece lost literacy for 400 years. The great port city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast, a trading hub linking 3 continents, was destroyed and abandoned. A cuneiform tablet found there, never fired, never sent, records the final message of its king. "There is no food in our houses," he wrote. "Our cities are destroyed." The historian Robert Drews summarized what archaeology shows us. Within a period of 40 or 50 years, almost every significant city in the eastern Mediterranean was destroyed, many of them never to be occupied again. It took some areas nearly 1,000 years to recover. This is the late Bronze Age collapse, and we still don't know what caused it. The first and simplest explanation, the one that dominated historical thinking for most of the 20th century, was invasion. Egyptian records from the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III describe waves of attackers arriving from the sea, a confederation of migrating peoples referred to in the texts as the Sea Peoples, who swept through the eastern Mediterranean in enormous numbers, destroying everything in their path. The relief carved on the walls of Ramesses III's temple at Medinet Habu shows them. Men in feathered helmets, fighting from ships and ox-drawn carts, bringing their families with them, women, children, cattle, as if they were not just raiding but migrating, looking for a new home, because their old one was already gone. Egypt fought them off, twice, in 1207 BC, and again in 1177 BC, Egyptian armies defeated the Sea Peoples at the borders of the Nile Delta. But the civilizations to the north and east were not so fortunate. The Hittites, the Ugaritians, the Mycenaeans. They had no Egypt, no great river, no Ramesses. For decades, this explanation seemed sufficient. The Sea Peoples destroyed the Bronze Age world. But then archaeology began accumulating evidence that made the invasion theory insufficient on its own. Because the Sea Peoples appear in Egyptian records as a consequence, not a cause. They were already displaced, already moving. Something had broken their world before they broke everyone else's. The question shifted. What drove the Sea Peoples from wherever they had been? In 2013, researchers at Cornell University published a study in the journal PLOS One, analyzing pollen records from lake sediments across the Levant. The pollen record is a proxy for rainfall. In dry years, certain plants decline. In wet years, others flourish. And the record for the late 13th century BC told a clear story. The Eastern Mediterranean experienced a prolonged and severe drought, beginning around 1200 BC. This was not a single bad harvest. It was a multi-decade shift in rainfall patterns, sustained long enough to devastate agricultural production across an entire region: the Levant, Anatolia, Greece. The Hittite Empire, which depended on grain production in the Anatolian plateau, had been sending emergency food requests to Egypt in the years before its collapse. The Egyptian records confirm this. The Hittites were already starving. Then, in 2023, researchers used dendrochronology, the analysis of tree rings, to date a severe 3-year drought in central Anatolia with extraordinary precision. 1198, 1197, and 1196 BC. 3 consecutive years of catastrophic rainfall failure, right at the start of the collapse. The Hittite Empire, already weakened, faced this without reserves, without alternatives, without time to adapt. If you're running a government in these areas, said Sturt Manning of Cornell University, one of the study's authors, you expect occasional droughts, and you plan for that. But what you don't expect or plan for is to have year after year of drought. The Hittite Empire disappeared from history within a generation of those 3 years. But drought alone does not explain everything, because some civilizations that collapsed were not primarily agricultural, and some that were agricultural survived. Egypt, protected by the Nile, weakened but did not fall. Assyria contracted but continued. The collapse was real and widespread, but it was not uniform. Something was hitting different civilizations differently, and hitting them simultaneously. The third layer of the story involves earthquakes. Geophysicist Amos Noor of Stanford University spent years mapping archaeological destruction layers across the Eastern Mediterranean. What he found was that the same 50-year window that saw the drought and the sea peoples also saw a rapid-fire series of major earthquakes striking sites across Greece, Anatolia, and the Levant. An earthquake storm, as Noor called it, in which tectonic stress released along multiple fault lines in quick succession. Sites that showed signs of seismic destruction include Mycenae, Tiryns, Medea, Thebes, and Pylos in Greece, Hattusa and other Hittite centers in Anatolia, and multiple sites along the Levantine coast. The evidence: collapsed walls with characteristic seismic signatures, buildings abandoned intact rather than burned, structural damage inconsistent with human attack, is not definitive at every site, but across the region, the pattern is striking. An earthquake does not destroy a civilization, but an earthquake that destroys the palace at the center of a palace economy, the storage center, the administrative center, the redistribution hub that the entire regional economy depends on, can trigger a cascade. People cannot be fed, records cannot be kept, authority cannot be maintained. And in a system with no redundancy, no fallback, a single catastrophic failure can propagate through the entire network, which is exactly what the Bronze Age trading system was: a network with no redundancy. Tin for making bronze came from Afghanistan. Copper came from Cyprus. Grain came from Egypt and Anatolia. Luxury goods, ivory, dyed cloth, precious metals, moved through a web of palace economies, each dependent on the others. Bronze itself, the metal that gave the age its name, required components from opposite ends of the known world to arrive reliably, on schedule, at the right place. When that network began to fail, when drought hit grain production, when earthquakes hit palace economies, when displaced populations began raiding trade routes, each failure accelerated the next. The Hittites lost their grain and could not trade. Ugarit lost its trading partners and could not function. The Mycenaeans lost the trade in metals and could not make weapons or sustain their palaces. The network unraveled. Historian Eric Klein of George Washington University who has written the most comprehensive modern account of the collapse, calls it a perfect storm, and explicitly frames it as a systems collapse rather than a single catastrophe. If you look at all of these events individually, drought, famine, invaders, earthquakes, maybe disease, any one of them is probably not enough to bring down an entire civilization, let alone 8 civilizations or more, Klein says. But all of them together, hitting at the same time, in a system with no redundancy, that is exactly what we see. The civilizations of the late Bronze Age had, in fact, survived all of these individual threats before. They had endured droughts, they had survived earthquakes, they had fought off invasions. What they had never faced was all of them simultaneously, in a system that had become so interconnected, so specialized, so dependent on every node functioning, that the failure of any one part threatened the whole. Sound familiar? There is one final detail that stays with you. At Ugarit, in the ruins of what was once the most cosmopolitan port city in the ancient world, archaeologists found something in the palace workshop, a bronze sword, still in the process of being repaired when the city was destroyed. The craftsman had left it mid-work. He never came back. In the palace archive, they found dozens of letters, diplomatic correspondence from kings across the Mediterranean, requests for help, warnings of approaching danger, appeals to trade partners who no longer existed by the time the letters could be delivered. And they found the letter that was never sent. The king of Ugarit, writing to the king of Cyprus in what appear to be the final weeks of the city's existence, reports that enemy ships are visible offshore, that the army has already left for other fronts, that there is no food, that his cities are already burning. "Do not abandon me," the letter ends. It was found unfinished, unfired, unsent, still in the clay. The city was destroyed before the king could seal it. 3,200 years later, archaeologists lifted it from the ruins, and they read it. We do not know what answered the call. We only know that no answer came in time, and that within a generation, the entire world that letter was written in had ceased to exist. The Bronze Age collapse remains one of the most complete civilizational failures in human history. The cause is still debated. The lesson is not. Interconnection is not the same as resilience, and a world that cannot survive the failure of any single part of itself is already more fragile than it knows.